Okay, right. Thank you, Maggie. Okay, welcome everyone to. Am I sharing my screen? Excellent. Yes, welcome everyone. This is the special interest group on artificial intelligence in measurement and education. One of our special sessions, which is in our speaker series. By way of introduction, of course, my name is Chris Ormerod. We have my co-chair is John Whitmer, who's also on the line, and our secretary, Maggie Bading-Parish, who is also on the line. We are the leadership team, so if you ever have any concerns, please reach out to us. So, first of all, there's a few AIME updates that we need to talk about before we have Sergio's talk, who is from Caveon. So he has an interesting talk lined up. And we also have a few other updates and calls for participation and conferences and whatnot. First of all, now, NCME, annual meeting. The annual meeting is themed on the educational measurement in service of society. And as you well know, there's a proposal deadline for September 13th. And already we are seeing many, many sessions being organized with AI as a focus. So if you are interested in organizing your own session, we certainly encourage that. And the feeling that we get is that NCME is really pushing for sessions over individual papers. And I'd like to think that our little group is a little boiling pot or a place where these sessions can form. So please, if you're considering putting together a session on a particular area of AI, of course, please do so. It's a wonderful thing to do, and it advances our field. And I think that it'll be a wonderful time in Denver. With that in mind, NCME is also asking for reviewers. Now, in collaboration with the committee, John Whitmer, Maggie, and I got together and posed a couple of areas that are a little bit more specific in terms of the focus of AI in education. So we have automated item generation and validation. We have automated scoring and feedback using AI, AI evaluation in education, and fairness and ethics of AI in education. Those are 4 areas that we'd like to see our members be reviewers for. So if you are, please consider being a reviewer, discussant, or a chair for any of these areas or any other areas that you feel you could be an expert in.
Jump in for one. Could I jump in for one sec?
Sure.
Just to say that we reached out because we felt like last year there were a lot of sessions around AI, but we didn't feel like they had as much coherence. Or I don't mean to be critical on that, but that some topics could have been that there was a bit that we wanted to help focus that, and so the board did reach out and invite us to help with the selection criteria. So just to say that there will likely be quite a few submissions for AI related sessions. And so hopefully we felt like these themes would align more with the work we were seeing that I think that as a group we're more excited about. And I think we had a couple of other criteria. I don't know if we've heard if those were accepted or not. Maggie, Chris, I think, did we hear back?
I don't know. I just pulled the reviewer categories from the website that they posted there for joining as a reviewer.
So I mean, maybe we could share those around what we submitted. Again, we're a subgroup, but like if you're looking at putting together a proposal and want ideas or like what will be of interest, maybe we can help share that criteria around. Again, given that it was a recommendation, it was a submission, it's unofficial and all those things, but just suggestions for how you can have sessions you may want to put together reviewed in a positive way.
Excellent. Thanks, John. Okay, so there's another thing that we have been approached about is the possibility of a special conference. Now, it sounds like NCME is it has a committee that would help us organize any conference, and they would help with the venue, the registration, and a whole lot of other things. They just need people to propose. And they're particularly interested in sessions in the fall of in the upcoming fall. So what they would require is a statement of the purpose and the preliminary details, time, place, and all this kind of stuff. And the planners would assist you in the project management, venue selection, event registration, and advertising. And we just wanted to throw it out there. Is anyone on the line or in our group interested in taking a lead on this? It's not a requirement or anything, but if you are interested in taking a lead and organizing a special conference with AI as a focus in measurement and education, please reach out to us and we can make a proposal with you towards that. Okay. Without further ado, oh, yes, the other thing is that we just want to advertise again that the fact that we have a white paper on the ethical challenges within artificial intelligence in education and measurement. If you haven't read it, please download it. It's on the archive. And I think Sergio even mentions it in his talk. So, without further ado, I present to you Sergio Araneda from Caveon. Sergio, would you like to share your screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
I think you need to stop sharing yours for me to start.
Yeah. There we go. Found it.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to present in this group. I really like all the work that you have done so far and the presentations and everything. It's really, really good what you're doing. And yeah, well, today I'm going to present like a presentation that covers broadly the research that we have been doing at Caveon with AI in particular. So I'm not going to go into too much detail in certain things, but at least I'm going to provide conclusions and so enough information for you to have an idea of what are the things that we have been working on, the take that we have in our company in terms of how to use AI, etc., etc. So the title of this presentation is Securing Tests with AI, Initial Explanations in Item Generation. At Caveon, we have a very specific take on how to approach the problem of test security that involves a lot of like work with test development. So that's why I'm kind of like in the title mixing these two things, like securing tests, but also doing item generation, which for some people may not be as related, but you will see how those are related really in the end. So the agenda for today, I'm going to first start speaking more about Caveon's specific take on test security. We do have certain concepts that require certain level of explanation for you to understand the session. Then I will present the results of a case study in which we generated items for a client using AI and kind of like provide like a general overview of that project. This is very similar to a presentation I did at ITC this July in Granada. Then I'm going to move to a third section really of the presentation in which I'm going to show some research we have done specifically on the generation of binary response items with AI. And also I will explain why that is kind of relevant for us. And finally, I will do a little demo on how to use AI, but not necessarily to create items, but to create item templates or writing code automatically using AI, and how that fits with all these approach that we have on the security. So first, let me speak a little bit more about Caveon's take on the security. So in general, the security, we understand the security something that requires a more holistic response that is not only relying on detection, but also requires work on prevention and on deterrence. And we kind of like put this image here to represent like our view on this. So detection and reaction is one leg on this table, but you need also work on these other two. And in particular, we really strongly believe and recommend to our clients that the best way to avoid cheating is to create a test that is much, much more difficult to cheat on. So if you are relying on proctors or if you're relying on some statistical model to detect, you are already losing that battle a lot because you should avoid actually to even achieve that level. So there are many other things that you can do in advance to prevent to even entering into that problem. That doesn't mean that you don't need to do that, but there is a lot of work that you can do on the development part of the test, so you can make more and more complicated for cheaters to actually cheat on the test. So when we started thinking about the use of AI, that was kind of like our mindset in terms of how to use AI. And one idea that we usually promote is that if you can randomize the generation of your test, that is a good thing from a security perspective, because you get rid of the problem of pre-knowledge. If you can somehow create variations of your test that can be unique for each test taker and that are still comparable enough so you can work with it. And that's a big part of how we are approaching the problem of the security, in that in terms of test development, trying to randomize as much as possible the generation of the test itself, so you don't have one unique fixed form that can be exposed and then installed, or you can have an obvious threat in terms of pre-knowledge. So in that regard, AI actually can help a lot, because if you want to randomize, you will depend on having a big item pool, and AI can help to have a big item pool. Also, if you cannot just have an item pool of fixed items, but also have templates, that also can help a lot to the randomization of your test. So that is kind of like the way in which we immediately interpreted the use of the AI in our context, in our view. Also, before the rise of large language models, we did have a few innovations in terms of item formats. So there is one concept that we use a lot that is called the smart item, which is like a concept developed in the company, in which you basically create an item pool that tries to cover a whole domain or subdomain. And that can be like one or multiple item templates that are put all together and can serve to randomize the generation of items, and can serve as your virtual item pool, basically. Again, in this idea of protection against pre-knowledge through randomization. And as a smart item, in the way in which we implement this, can be interpreted in the first impression is that you're implementing an item template for automatic item generation, but in our case, we allow the possibility of test developer to deliver these items directly. So the item template becomes kind of the item and can generate many versions of the items on the fly. The second thing that we also like a lot, and it's part of the innovation that Caveon has been trying to promote, is this idea of discrete option multiple choice. It's an item format in which you put together many binary response items in sequence, and basically you create rules in order to score what people respond. So it's basically like a series of true-false items with more logic on top of it. So this item format has also, depending on how you build it, also has certain randomization characteristic that we know are good for the security. Also, it removes the part of test whiteness that usually comes with multiple choice by kind of like separating. If you, for example, you have a multiple choice item, you can transform it into a DMC, and you can basically force the test taker to respond back for each option, not the 4 or 5 of options presented at the same time. We know this item format has a lot of potential, but in order to use that, usually you will require to have statements that can be correct or incorrect, and a test taker will need to decide on that. So because we like this item format, our first impression of how to use AI was to generate true false items or correct incorrect statements if you want, using AI. So that's slightly different from what people have been doing, because people usually try to focus more on multiple choice, but because we have this specific preference towards the UMC, we have been more focused on binary response items. So that's also part of why our research is leaning into that direction. So now I will present the results of one case study that we did for, it's based on a project we did for a client. And this happened last year in the early beginnings of the massive use of large language models. People were so excited, people wanted to try that. And we had a client that actually, they agreed to create a lot of items using AI. This was for some summative assessment that they needed to create. And we have a platform called Scorpion that is our platform for secure test delivery. And we created like a little app that was making the communication with GPT 3.5. I think that was at that point. And basically was integrated also with Scorpion. So you could talk with a chat or use ChatGPT and create items that were immediately created in the Scorpion platform. And basically for this project, we took a semi-automatic approach. So what we did was to use AI to create a lot of initial versions of the item, and then we edited them, filtered them. So we created a final version of this list of items that were reviewed by our client and then finally accepted or rejected. So the workflow, if you want, was first to have content curators organizing and preparing course materials, then using the app to create items with some form of human guidance, then doing checks on the question that we created, doing more checks that were more using general guidelines on how you can write good items, and then have subject matter expert reviewing those items, and then having a final edit. This is like a screenshot of the type of app that we use. Here, there are some things that they were just to kind of like put some word in the final call to the chat. I don't think we're careful enough with this part of the difficulty, for example, but still, we allowed a lot of like control on the human side to use the app. Also, we include this section in which you could upload information that can be used as a source for the item generation, etc. This is the results of the whole project. So the client had 6 learning paths, and we initially had this number of items that were created and had some acceptance in terms of internal review. Also here, I put the average of versions on each item. So because there was this kind of like cycles of review and humans kind of like also working on the item, this also gives you an idea of how much work did you need to actually get the item from what the AI generated to what the client needed. And this is the now final number of items that were accepted by the client and the requirement. And in general, we see that overall, 2/3 of the items that we provided to the client were accepted. And with an average number of versions of 2.8, like almost 3 versions per item. So the first version is version 1, so you have at least 2 iterations on average on these items. This is like an histogram of the number of versions that all the items that we provided have. And you can see that again, like in general, mostly you had 3 versions of the item, meaning at least two edits on it. And less than 10% of the items were used as generated by the large language model, which is on itself, I think, is an important statistic here. Also, we did like a little qualitative part of the study in which we ask the item reviewers. We have focus groups and surveys with the item reviewers about their experience during the project. And there are very interesting insight that came from that part. First of all, the team recognized that preparing content for AI was a big thing. They took a lot of time to actually put the content in the right format so the large language model could consume it. And some people even mentioned that, for example, when they receive videos, they needed to include some form of transcript that was describing what was in the video in order to make that work. I think right now, ChatGPT is doing a much better job in that regard, but still at that point, they required a little bit of extra work in order to prepare, to have the content ready to be used. Also, it was very clear that the quality of the content had a very obvious impact on the quality of the items that you could generate. And when you had content that was kind of shallow, like not really deep, then the quality of the question that you could generate wasn't that good. ChatGPT was creating items that were kind of monotonous or repetitive, and that was kind of like complicated at some point. Also, an interesting thing was that in the process of creating the items, it was necessary at some point to have more information than just the content. It includes some form of contextual information sometimes. Particularly in this project, there were some items that were requested to be like simulation or like cases, if you want. And in order to provide information to create a proper case, you needed more information than just the content to understand what type of scenario were reasonable, you know? So that also, I think, I find that very interesting in terms of item construction in general, you know, that all these processes kind of like highlighting what is the exact type of information that you need in order to do your job for item development. Also, prompting was mentioned by the item reviewers / writers. That was part of the process. They use prompting. The app allowed that in order to either put the focus of ChatGPT in certain subtopic or helping ChatGPT to break its own patterns in terms of item generation. That was also part of what the item writer described as part of what they need to do in order to have reasonable items. And also another insight that we had was that item bank management in general I think it would change a lot with all this game, because it's so easy now to create items that the way in which you manage item banks probably will require a big change in how you do this. And we also understand that probably if you can transit from items to item templates or in the line of what we do with smart items, probably that can be a way in which you can do your item bank management better, in the sense that if you can somehow cluster items in something that fits within some group of coherent clones of items, or something that you can allow to be in the same group, that actually could be necessary even to manage this, because it can become very, very complex very quick. So that was one study that we had. That's the case study on our very early use of AI for item generation. Now I'm going to change topic and move on pieces of research that we have on how to use generative AI for binary response item generation.
Joe, is it okay if this is John, if I ask a quick question or two?
Sure, yeah.
Just a quick, I put it into the chat, but I know you're sharing your screen, so often that doesn't show up. Or
yeah, sorry, yes, yeah.
But the question is that, can you speak about, you had difficulty and there was another option on those items. Can you speak a bit more about the kind of questions or the kind of items you were generating? Were they like content recall? Were they summarization? I'm thinking, were they kind of summarization type tasks? And then that's the one question. And then the kind of question that follows on from that are criteria used for the acceptance criteria for the SME reviews? Because that 66%, I mean, that is a lot of SME review. And so were they just looking for factualness and hallucinations? Or I'm kind of wondering, because this evaluation, especially for like higher order responses around, problem solving or conceptual application, that evaluation criteria can be very challenging. So I wonder if you could speak to those two items.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that the items that were required many times it was more like creating some sort of scenario in which a person needed to apply some form of knowledge related to the content. So it was closer more to application rather than recall. But I would say that that wasn't the whole of the project. So I would say there was variation within the learning path in terms of like the type of question that were required. My understanding also is that in terms of this hallucination were on our side to catch. And the job of the subject matter expert was more to confirm that the items were well suited for the learning path, more in terms of like the content domain. Yeah, I don't think I have any information to respond every part of what you ask. Eventually, I can come back to you with all of that, but that's what I understand from the case study. Because I compile a lot of the work that was done, but I wasn't part of the team that worked actually in the item generation. So maybe I can consult with them to respond better to your question.
Okay, that's great. And yeah, just knowing what kind of items they were generating and evaluating, that'd be.
And sorry, and well, there were multiple choice items, by the way. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Chris,
is there any
opinion about if the items had diversity issues? And I assume that, Chris, you mean fairness issues by diversity?
No. As in, a lot of the time, if you prompt a language model in a certain way, you're going to get questions of a very, very similar form to each other, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, and what happens is that you may not get the sort of diversity that you get in banks generated by humans.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, the item writers, they reported that they had that issue, and basically they used prompts to break that. So when they saw that the items were too similar to each other, they basically added more prompts to make the chat be more creative, or to force the chat to be more creative. Yeah.
Thank you.
But that was reported, yes. Any other question before I move to the next topic? All right. So yeah, so the second topic, the next section on this, the research about binary response items. It was interesting that before ChatGPT, we were working in a little research using NLP to generate true-false items. And we were kind of like comparing humans with NLP techniques. But then large language model came, and actually we could do the comparison between the three of them. So actually, we kind of like played with all of these. And interestingly, there was like different categories that we in the end used to do the comparison. We took a paper about the security, and we created statements from that paper. And then we used subject matter expert to see if the statement were aligned with the content. And basically you hear all this, let me explain this letter here. C means correct, I means incorrect. So each category, if it starts with a C, means it's correct statements. Then the second letter means who created the statement. So H is a human, L is a large language model, and M is a machine, but meaning specifically a machine using NLP. And in the case of NLP, it could happen that you needed to create, in order to create an incorrect statement, you needed to have a correct statement first. So a human and a large language model could create them from scratch, but the techniques we tried from NLP, they require to have a correct statement in order to create an incorrect one. So that forces us to create these two categories that are using an NLP, but taking a correct statement that was created originally by a human or a machine. So the second letter is the creator of the correct statement, and the first letter is the one that created the actual incorrect one. And we played a similar game with the large language model. So that created a lot of like categories in terms of like how you can create the incorrect statement. This plot kind of like presents the distribution of the like Likert response. We create like a Likert 1 to 5 scale for congruency with the content. And here, in general, you can see that correct statements are easier to create. Humans were actually leading this game. Large language model were doing a reasonable job, but surprisingly, NLP techniques were having a greater average. For incorrect statements, our initial experiment were showing that NLP techniques, at least the one that we tried, were not very good. But large language models actually were doing a much better job on creating incorrect statements. And still humans were better, but large language models were close to that. And here you have like the actual average for each of the categories. So you can see that 3.6 against 4 human versus large language model for incorrect is close enough. And surprisingly, NLP was beating LLM for correct statement generation, which for me was surprising. I guess when you need to repeat this for other content domains in order to see if it's really, this is really like a pattern. Also, we did a few experiments on using G-theory to evaluate the smart items, and this is a collaboration with people from UMass and with Professor Craig Wells. And basically, we kind of like, again, use AI to create many items for a content domain. In this case, we created items for a statistic class, and we kind of like try to do different ways. We tried by asking ChatGPT to create many versions of true, false items related with stats content. And the second way was to take one example that we liked, and then we asked ChatGPT to create code that created many variations of the same question. So here, this is like some coefficient that you can calculate in G-theory to see how representative is the item that you pick from the whole pool. And this first table is for the items that use code. And the second table is for the one that use ChatGPT to create a finite number of instances. And actually, this one didn't work that well compared with the one that actually used code. So somehow ChatGPT can create too much diversity in some cases, but in this study at least it happened that way, which kind of like suggests that actually using code instead of creating many versions might be a better way when you want to multiply your item pool using AI. Finally, this is a third study that I cannot share too much because we are promised to present this at NERA, but at least I will give you the conclusion of the study. This again was part of a collaboration with people at UMass. Here we use different prompts in order to create binary response items, again, for a statistics class. And we evaluated 3 dimensions: correctness, content alignment, and general quality. And first of all, we took like recommendations from the literature in how you write true-false items. And we use that to create prompts to create items. And then we compare like the quality of the item depending on the prompt that was used to see if there was an actual difference between the prompts. And interestingly, we didn't see really a significant difference between prompts. Even when it was actually surprising because the prompt could be very different. But even with that, we didn't trigger a big difference in terms of the quality of the items. Now, the part of the content domain did matter though. So we at least took 3 subsections of the content domain and we saw significant difference across that. So at least for true-false items, it seemed that the prompt itself, the specific of the prompt to create the true-false item didn't really matter that much, but it could create like a result that is not homogeneous across content domains. Finally, I wanted to kind of like show a little bit like also this idea of not using AI just to create fix items, but to create code that encapsulates the logic of an item template. So I will show you this live, like how you can do this. I did this demo for COTS, the Conference of the Security, last year. And this is also part of where our mind is in terms of how to use AI. So just give me 1 second here. I will show now this way. So here I have a question, a math question, and I will ask ChatGPT to generalize the question, writing code in JavaScript to generalize the question. So here I have like a sequence of prompts that can do a good job on how to do this. So I will do ChatGPT, I will copy this, and I will ask ChatGPT just to generalize this question. It's a very simple math question. And as you know, ChatGPT is capable of creating code, so that actually is very good for item template generation when you rely on code to do this. And here I just kind of encoded like all the specific requirement that you need in order for that code to fit our platform. So I will just send all these instructions and make ChatGPT update the code so it fits better with Scorpion, the platform that we use. And interestingly, when we saw this the rise of generative AI, we realized that we could use this in a very smooth way in order to create the questions through creation of code. I won't explain much about the functioning of the platform here, but at least we have this option that can receive code right away. So you literally can copy paste, and then you can have these variations of the item based on the code that you generated. And you see that here is coming into this idea of the smart item, that you put the item template directly, and then you can present that to your delivery. And you see it didn't take like 2 minutes to do this. So when we saw that, it was like, wow, this has a lot of potential. And we are kind of like working a lot on this idea, on this type of use for AI. And on what else you can do with this. So for example, using the prompt, also you can kind of like direct the creation of distractors for multiple choice questions that can be important. So using the prompt itself, you can also help the question generation to have better distractors. ChatGPT usually put just silly distractor at the beginning, but when you prompt it to make it more relevant in terms of like the question, then actually can create reasonable distractors that can be better used. And yeah, well, in general, the prompt also I ask to create many distractors, so that also can be helpful when you're thinking this more randomized way to have more options than needed. So this basically creates a whole way of creating items in which you can have your item writer playing with ChatGPT, relying on ChatGPT to create code, and not just focusing on one single item, but to focus on the whole item template. And also, it can happen here that eventually you will see that some instances of the template will have issues that also you can go back to ChatGPT and talk about them and improve your code. So actually right now, I think we have one project, I think, in which we are actively doing this. And they ask us to create smart items. We are using ChatGPT to kind of create code when necessary, and relying on the capacity of ChatGPT to deal with the programming part, and bringing a programmer that just comes with is strictly necessary, but not for every single creation of an item. And yeah, I mean, and also we have been trying to play also not just with the generation of the template. I'm sorry? Okay. Also with the cultural relevancy of the content. So eventually you can play with ChatGPT to create variations that are not just on features of the question itself, but also on the storyline that you are embedding the item into. I find that when you put this type of instruction, you get reasonable results in terms of like the type of translation into something that could be considered more relevant for a certain specific subgroup. When you don't put that, you can usually go to stereotypes. But when you put this type of specificity, you can get actually reasonable prompts, stems using ChatGPT.
Amy Clark asked a question around that, asking if there were or she asked if there were ways you were incorporating fairness analysis in when you're generating the items, or if you were handling it post hoc. Just thought that might riff off of the point you just made as you showed how you were changing.
Yeah. I mean, I think right now, usually when in the project that we have been working on, the clients are not really that into that type of analysis. And that's unfortunate because I think that's very important. Yeah. Also, the type of client that we have had are usually like IT companies that are doing certification. So in that world, I don't think they are thinking on these issues as they should. Yeah, unfortunately I don't think we have specific research on that, and definitely it's necessary. Well, we are kind of like worried at least on the idea of using AI for thematic translations, and part of that will require to actually confirm that if you're doing a translation in terms of the themes, then you're actually getting what you expect in terms of like cultural relevancy and fairness and what you can get from that type of variations.
Sue, do you want to ask your question now, maybe?
Leave me 1 second because I'm finishing right now, and let me finish with this last slide. So this is like a very general overview of what we have done at Caveon. We also have our minds thinking on these other type of things. So for example, cost analysis and automatic item template generation, closer to what I just presented in the demo here. Like, okay, if you use this, what's the actual impact in terms of cost when you create item templates using ChatGPT versus other ways of doing it? Thematic translations, as I was mentioning, that's something also that we kind of are interested on, because if you can create variations of an item, we know that that's good for the security. And if you can make those variations more related with the theme, that actually can help us to work on the direction of fairness and cultural relevancy, etc. So, and AI is showing that eventually you can use that for automatizing or facilitating that type of translation. And also something that we are very worried is the new threats that are coming with the use of AI. We have been seeing that there are a proliferation of browser extensions, for example, that are using ChatGPT to respond to questions very smoothly that are presented in a browser. And actually, we need to do like a big update in our platform to protect ourselves from those type of browser extensions. And AI is actually bringing severe problems in terms of the security. We are particularly creating a session specific on this for NCME. Hopefully, we can have that accepted, or at least have something done on that, because this is a topic that I'm not sure if we're speaking enough about this, and there are important new concerns that come from the use of AI in terms of the security. So yeah, that's also something that we are worrying about and part of our research agenda. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
John, yeah,
Sorry.
thanks. John, did you want me to ask my question? I know you had queued me up. I can, this is Sue. Yeah, okay. Sergio, thanks for the presentation. I appreciated it. Just a quick question. I put it in the chat too, but as we, as item generation has kind of a long history and now LLMs can help with that, they can create a lot of items like you've shown. And then you have the content review issue, and then you have field testing, right? Just how do you field test all these items and get stats? So I was wondering if field testing was part of your design in this particular program, or if you just kind of go through psychometric and content review, and then items are just administered and part of whatever program. Like, how are you guys thinking about obtaining item parameters for IRT or whatever you do, and then evaluating the item performances?
Yeah, I mean, for the first, the case study that I presented, I think, I'm not sure if they field tested, but I would say that that was part of the job that the client they needed to do. We didn't promise anything, or we didn't provide any parameters on the items. That was the project was more about the generation of the items. The client was handling all that part. I will give my very personal view. I'm not sure if this is the Caveon's official view, but I will give my personal view on the matter. I think that in order to really automatize or use AI to successfully predict how an item will behave, basically that requires you to simulate in a better way what a person would do in front of your item. So that, in my head, is something that a large language model is not really ready to do. So you can have many approaches to do that, but it's difficult for me to believe that you actually will be able to do that job correctly if you cannot do at least that part of the job in terms of like the interaction, simulate basically the interaction between a person and the item. Particularly for item parameters, I really don't understand how people are trying to even try to predict that if they don't characterize the target population first. That information is key in order to have any prediction of item parameters. So for me, that's the very baseline of the problem. And again, I think that as long as large language models are better into simulating a person, meaning that they are kind of getting closer to general intelligence, then that task is going to be better and better. Right now, I feel more hesitant to really say that that's a job that I could rely or massively use for many items, because it's difficult for me to believe that a large language model will do that job well if you cannot really simulate that potential test taker with a large language model. But this is my very personal take, so I may be very wrong on this. So for you to know, okay?
Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question?
John, I just wanted to follow up on Sergio's very personal. This actually came up in a conversation this morning in a separate meeting, and I just Kristen DeSerba, who forwarded this paper below, in that about Gen AI doing a poor job at field testing. So to your point, Sergio, here's at least a corroborating measure of the validity of the point you just made that just came up this morning. And I wonder about, the ability of Gen AI to represent the diversity of test takers.
Yeah.
I did have a question about how well the client responded to the work that you did, or to the degree you can comment on that, what they found useful or not useful. As you said, you did this as client-facing work for generative AI. Is it something they thought, oh, this is promising, we want to go forward with it? Did they not feel that way? Anything you can comment about?
Yeah, unfortunately, we tried to reach out to the subject matter experts and make them part of the qualitative part of the research, and the company did not agree on that. They didn't want to be part of the study, unfortunately. So we don't have much information about that side of the story. All I present is more the insight from the item developers on our side, but not on their side. My understanding is that they were okay with the project in general, because also they didn't really face much of the problems that happen with AI, they just receive a list of items. So, and they receive them in a relatively short time, because our rough estimate is that the project took a third of what the project would have taken without AI. So it was relatively cheaper, faster. All of that was kind of like positive face to the client. but unfortunately, I do not have specific evidence on the exact opinions that they got because they didn't want to participate on the research. Yeah.
I kind of meant at a higher level, more of the leadership and sponsorship of the project, how they found the results that you shared with us, how those were received or sponsored.
Yeah, I am not aware of that. I think they were positive in general, and but I don't think I've heard specifics on that level. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Anyone
Rachel,
else? Sorry.
Rachel had a comment up above. I wonder, Rachel, do you want to speak to that, or would you like us to voice over?
Yeah, just to type in my question. On top of that, I also wonder if the items, like if the items are generated randomly, and also we could create a lot of different version of a test that's supposed to measure the same construct, then how can we evaluate those different version of the test, the validity and reliability every time we create a different version of things? It's so like by using technology like this AI item generating function, like a technology, we can benefit like to create a lot of different version of the test. But I'm just wondering, how can we catch up with all those validity and reliability, all those different version of things? How can we assure psychometrically
Yeah, I mean,
to
yeah, we have been actively working on that. Interestingly, Lord, when he proposed the idea of randomly parallel test, that actually happened very long time ago, in the 50s or 60s. And it's very interesting because he imagined the possibility of taking items randomly from an item pool without having the technology really to implement that. But actually, he came with many interesting statistical results, assuming that, not having that really in order to have it for real, but still doing the statistical bit. So, for example, there is a paper in which Lord mentioned what's the better way in which you can do reliability for this type of tests that are randomly generated, and this what they call the randomly parallel test. Now, at least the paper in which he explains, actually, basically what he explains is that KR21 is like a reasonable formula for reliability, assuming that each item within the item pool has the same item characteristic curve. So that assumption, we are kind of like trying to understand like how bad is that assumption. If you break that assumption, what happened? And what are the type of tests that you can do to actually show that you do have that assumption in place for an item. Also, more intuitively from item construction, we know that actually that the restriction can be easily broken. So for example, let's say you create an item that asks a test taker to multiply two numbers below 100. So if you randomly pick two numbers from that set and put them in the multiplication, it's very different if you ask 26 times 32 versus 10 times 30. You know, like cognitively, it's very difficult to believe that those two questions are going to behave the same, because actually just by randomness, one is simpler than the other, you know. So in the process of generating these item pools, probably you will need to have some form of refinement in order to have the proper homogeneity in groups in order to use them with a psychometric model that requires them. Now, there is another way of looking at this that is more thinking from the point of view of G theory. So when you think about G theory, basically your true score is a whole average. And maybe you don't care that much if your item pool is not as homogeneous as you want, because you basically will just assume that the true score is the average of whatever you put there. The problem with that is that will require someone to use a psychometric model that is based on G-theory. And that's a problem because eventually your psychometrics are different and you want to use a different model in order to use your psychometrics. So that's actually a dilemma basically you face when you try to switch to smart items, because either you switch to a different psychometric model that actually is well fitted for this type of test, or you try to extend whatever model you have in order to fit to the randomization, but that's kind of unexplored territory most of the time. So yeah, that's kind of like where we are in that question, because you're right. I mean, validity, reliability, all those questions are absolutely essential in all of these, and actually create very interesting psychometric challenges. But the problem is that you need to have a proper theory if you really want to use this for a large scale or more serious test. Yeah.
Okay. I think we'll just end the questions there because we have just a few announcements. Thank you very much, Sergio. That was a wonderful presentation. And thanks for telling us what Caveon is doing around item generation and test security. That was wonderful.
No problem. Thank you.
Yes. So the first thing is that there's a postdoc in NLP in education at UMass Amherst. Andrew Lan has this as a result of an NSF grant. So if you're interested, please, and you're a graduate student, please consider applying. There is the 49th annual IAEA conference, and which is the International Association for Educational Assessment. And the focus of this conference is how can AI help improve educational assessments? So that is happening in Philadelphia from the 22nd to 25th, and I believe ETS is hosting that. And if so, please come along. There's another session, so it's the 2024 NCME Special Conference on Classroom Assessment. And that, I believe, has some AI components as well. And that will be happening around the 19th to the 20th of September in Chicago. So if you're interested in either of those, please feel free to register, come along, participate, and we'll see you there. Thank you very much. And it's been a wonderful session. Thank you to all involved.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Excellent.